Hey Gemini, thanks for coming into Light Reading headquarters today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve.
So tell us about UXP Systems, your company. What is it? What do you do? And what makes you different?
Yeah, so UXP Systems, a 5-year-old company. We are focused on delivering digital identity as a strategic service for telecom and cable operators.
Right. And tell us about that. How is it different? And in some ways, I guess, more challenging for operators to manage digital users than a traditional customer. And also, I guess, part two of the question, does it allow them to compete more effectively with OTT operators if they get this right?
Yeah, I'll start with the second and then come back to why it's so important. So first of all, absolutely, in terms of competing with OTT and even just remaining relevant, ensuring that operators can have a digital ID is really the basis on which we all interact with digital services. First thing you have to do when you sign up with Apple is create an ID. When you get a new device, put in your Apple ID or create an Apple ID.
Right.
And that becomes the anchor around which your music, your content, your purchases, your personalization, everything syncs around you. So if operators want to play a role in this digital services value chain, and they're wondering why they aren't playing such a role, it's because they don't have that relationship with every individual user. Why that's so hard is that, as you know, their BSS, OSS infrastructure has been vectored around two types of relationships. One is in the cable world, it's vectored around the household. And in the wireless world, it's vectored around a SIM card. So there's no user in any of that.
Right.
There's an implied user, but there's no actual user.
It's abstracted, really, isn't it?
It is, and it has to be explicit if you really want to say, that's Steve, and I'm going to deliver digital services to him.
Yeah.
So
and those services are going to follow me around, which is, of course, one of the beauties of really well-produced and delivered digital services, that it stays with you. If you start watching a Netflix movie on one device and then you go home and it starts up from the same point on your home screen, and that kind of seamlessness is just not part of something which we're used to from traditional operators right now, unfortunately.
I agree, and you said it, it goes with you, which means it transcends the household and it transcends the mobile device.
Exactly.
So the issue is that the operators have built all of this legacy infrastructure vectoring the relationship around the household or the device. What we have done is found a way to essentially break that paradigm without breaking those systems. We layer on top a user lifecycle management platform that allows grouping, delegation, invitation, revocation, all of the things that Apple and Uber and Netflix can do, but the operators simply don't have the capabilities and really would be challenged to try to begin to customize their underlying infrastructure to adapt to this new paradigm.
So tell me a little bit more about the technology. It's like a shim which sits over the existing OSS BSS between that capability and the customer. How does it work exactly?
Yeah, shim, wedge, middleware. You've heard all the terms. Brain, which is probably my favorite term. It essentially takes the account paradigm and above it layers on a data model that's user-centric and a very robust application and business process platform that allows you or anyone to come in and essentially create those households, create those relationships. And underneath, we still rely on all of those sources of truth, the account, the subscription, the services, but we essentially can remap them around every individual user in the context of the household they're in, the subscriptions they have and the services that are important to them.
What do you think? I mean, you use the term digital user lifecycle. It's obviously a term we're hearing more and more. You're probably one of the first users of it, though. What's the key to managing the lifecycle successfully, as it were?
Well, it's a good question, and I'll tell you, one of the things that we use this term intentionally for is that there is a whole domain of identity management and single sign-on. And typically that's a username and a password, right? When we talk about the life cycle, we talk about all of these processes about identifying the user. Is he a customer? Is he a non-customer? I want to onboard him regardless. What do I entitle him to? How do I give him access and authorization? How do I allow him to unify services, whether they're core services or new digital cloud services? How do I allow him to group, to share, to delegate, to revoke, to manage? That's a whole life cycle. It's essentially akin to CRM, to customer relationship management, but it's not about the account. It's about the user. It's user relationship.
That's a great analogy, isn't it? It's a great way to add a business layer to the personalization of the end user, isn't it?
Right. right.
Yeah, it's a great way of looking at it.
It really does evolve where traditional single sign-on needs to move to if operators care about a relationship with every digital user.
Do you think a lot of operators are overly focused on the single sign-on part without looking at the opportunity beyond it right now? I know they're your customer, so you don't want to criticize them, but that sort of feels a little bit like what time it is right now.
Yeah, I think single sign-on has certainly preoccupied operators because there's all this, third-party content to log people into. But I think they've also realized that, hey, listen, I can give, a household owner single sign-on, but if that person wants to delegate paying the bill to their spouse, they can't do it unless they share their username and password. So there are a number of use cases that say single sign-on isn't enough. Even more than that, I think what's happened is they built siloed SSO platforms.
Yeah.
We're working with an operator right now, actually it's announced, with Vodafone. And our first project, thank you very much. Thank you.
Big win.
Yeah, it certainly is. Certainly is for a small company like ours. We came across one of their operators that has 6 different siloed identities. So the first thing we are doing is empowering the end user to just federate those into one, right? So essentially we can abstract away all of that complexity in the back-end systems and bring new capabilities around group and user management.
When you're talking to operators, how do you explain the ROI? How do you give them the elevator pitch on the business case for what you're selling?
Yeah, it's if we want to keep it really simple, it really comes down to the fact that if you can engage more of your users digitally, there's an implied deflection away from call center, more self-serve. That's really I would say the vanilla boring use case.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you that most of our operators can justify their investment in us just on the basis of increased self-care. You've got today penetration of digital ID in an operator environment is 30% of accounts, right? Where you have multiple users per account. That should be up around 200%, right? Penetration. So we can bring that number up. I think the other piece, though, is if anyone wants to sell digital services, you need to broker it through a digital ID, right? How else would you do it? So if the operator wants to resell a Spotify or a Hulu, it's not about, you don't just say, here, I'll bill it to the credit card and create 20 different logins. You want to drive all of that through a single extensible digital identity, which is a service unto itself.
Yeah.
That's the real business case. That's where operators need to go to.
There's an interesting thing happening right now in our industry where OSS BSS incumbents are actually becoming as much part of the problem as part of the solution, in my opinion. I don't expect you to agree with me, but maybe you do. But I would have expected the solution which you've spent 5 years developing to be part of their portfolio, and yet actually we don't see very much of that happening right now. Why are they not in a position to bring out solutions like this, which are a natural extension of where they sit in the network?
Yeah, it's a question that I maybe not be the fairest person to ask. I spent 20 years working in telecom, BSS, OSS, before starting the company, with great companies. And I think one of the challenges that operators have is they are so focused on the mission critical systems that they're supporting today. There still is the need for good CRM, for good billing, for good self-care. And when the bulk of their innovation, their R&D still needs to go towards that core, it's very hard to develop a new competency in a disrupting world and allocate your best people to go do it. So sometimes innovation in large companies, it's a cliche, it best happens outside of the large company and then maybe comes back in via a partnership or an acquisition. We have partnerships with Ericsson and Amdocs, and they've been good, and they need to do what they're good at, and we can certainly complement the solution with what we're good at.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting. And I mean, you have had significant customer success. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I have to be careful about the details I share, but
high level's fine.
Certainly, market validation. We recently announced a deal with Vodafone Group, where the first project is actually in Germany, which is, I would consider, the crown jewel of the Vodafone empire, if you will. Yeah. We have started a fairly big project with Liberty Global's Latin American Caribbean properties, which has run out to 14 countries. So we're powering about a dozen different digital services through one single ID they call Flow ID, which is actually marketed just like Apple ID, and we believe giving Apple ID a run for its money in that region. We have Rogers as a customer, TELUS as a customer, a few other operators. Yeah, so we've managed to actually the social proof of the operators that we're working with is and the size are really enough to kind of allow any operator to take a serious look at us and say, wow, if you could do it there, then certainly you can do something with our infrastructure.
Is the business model, because you sell software obviously, is the business model from selling software easy when you go into a Vodafone? Obviously they roll you out in a certain part of the network, but it's a vast company. I mean, is there huge upside potential from deals like that?
Well, I wish that our list price flew wherever we sold. I mean, what we have to do is get creative. You look at a Vodafone that has 330, I think, million subscribers. So we start out with a base price that rapidly tiers down, right? I mean, if we had one price per subscriber, they would do the mental math and they'd say, how many billions would it be to deploy our software? Certainly when we engage them, you have to get creative in the way you price. I mean, we need to find a way, and they know that it's in their best interest for us to be profitable as well as we grow. So, typically they're fair customers.
So to finish then, Gemini, tell me in a nutshell, why is digital identity the next big operator service? Because we're always looking for the next big thing, aren't we?
I would say it this way. Digital identity is the service of services. Right? If you look at it, and I always have to go back to the Apple and the Google example, or even the Facebook example, you have the digital identity, and it becomes the payment method, it becomes the messaging gateway, it becomes the content, the app. You take it away, there's no way to essentially get access to this breadth of services. And I remember talking to an analyst, and he said, the operators are losing it to the OTTs, and they just don't know why, and it's because they don't have the user.
Right.
And they have a customer, but they don't have that digital user. And so identity is really it's a service because it needs to be feature rich. It can be monetized, and it certainly does open up the operator to being relevant in a digital world. And I would say this: without it, what other digital service or what other strategic service could you enable?
I mean, this is a very interesting story for me because I've been doing this for such a long time that I've seen different companies approach communications in different ways. There was sort of the infrastructure approach, which a lot of people made a lot of money on around the turn of the century, and then kind of combusted. And then since then, a lot of companies kind of moved up the stack and have made money from applications and services. But you're the first person who's come in and sat in the CEO interview chair and actually looked at it right the way to the end, to its logical conclusion, which is the end user, the individual. And if we tie everything to that point, if we can do that successfully, that's the answer, isn't it? Everything else falls into place behind it. So I think it's a great vision.
I hope so.
Yeah, I mean, you've been around for 5 years. You don't need to get any more funding, and it seems like you're having an absolutely fantastic time. It's a really great story, and it's exactly the type of story which we like telling at Light Reading. So I really appreciate you coming in.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity.
Anytime. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too, Steve.